Oh yeah, we got the shirt. What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 cards from Code of the Duelist. The Code of the Duelist sneak peek is this weekend with the release of the set the following week. So I just wanted to get you guys the cards that I'm looking the most forward to, and if you're attending a sneak peek or if you plan on buying the set in general, that these are the cards you're definitely going to want to look out for. Now do keep in mind, this is purely my subjective opinion. You guys might be looking forward to a ton of different cards, but these are just my personal favorites. So, starting off with number 5, we have TRICKSTAR Reincarnation. TRICKSTAR Reincarnation is a cute little trap that just does so many cool shenanigans. So on activation, your opponent banishes their entire hand, and then they draw the same number of cards. And then, if you happen to have a TRICKSTAR monster in your graveyard, you can banish it and you can special summon it. So, on activation, TRICKSTAR Reincarnation is a -1 because you're not really gaining anything out of it. Maybe if you have some knowledge from a prior card that you know what's in your opponent's hand, you might be able to banish something that's incredibly powerful, maybe a limited one of, or something like that if you happen to know your opponent drew it, like say they revealed it off of Pot of Duality or something like that. So there is some cool interaction there, and then you get your advantage back if you're actually playing a TRICKSTAR dedicated archetype or have access to a TRICKSTAR monster, you know, without needing to play any of the cards in the archetype, which I don't think is exactly possible. But regardless, the cool shenanigans that this card does, I absolutely love. And the interaction that this card can have with Droll and Lockbird is absolutely fucking disgusting. If you can manage to pull off Droll and Lockbird before you activate TRICKSTAR Reincarnation, your opponent banishes their entire hand, and they don't get to draw jack shit. So, this is a card where it's probably not going to see a ton of play. There's going to be some trolly TRICKSTAR players that are going to be obviously playing this card because it's incredible for the deck, but aside from the people who really just want to troll, you shouldn't really expect to see too much of this card, but it's definitely something you might want to look out for, just so you don't get absolutely wrecked by it. Now moving on to number 4, we have Spellbook of Knowledge. I actually just did a video the other day about Spellbook of Knowledge, and I feel this is on the list for good reason. I talked about how Spellbook of Knowledge, in short, kind of toolboxes a couple of the other Spellbook cards that we've had from previous sets, and really gives that archetype some new light, not for the archetype itself, but for other supplemental archetypes by acting as a complementary draw engine for engines like acting for the Invoked archetype, or, you know, you can even use it in Dark Magicians or Wind Witches. There's a ton of just purely spellcaster-based archetypes that Spellbook of Knowledge really just acts as a boon to help those decks get a little mini draw engine going, can actually boost their consistency by quite a bit. Now, if you want to see my full detailed review of that card, I'd highly recommend checking out the video, but I definitely felt that it deserved a mention on this list. Also, too, because it's an ultra rare, and it's going to be very easily accessible if this is one of the top cards that you're looking out for. Now, moving on to number 3, we have probably the card that I was not expecting to be at this low of a rarity, and that card is Back to the Front. Now, Back to the Front is a absolutely ridiculous card, and if you do not know that this card exists, you're in for a rude awakening, because this is a card that is only going to be a rare, and if you're going to sneak peek, or if you're going, you know, to buy a couple boxes of this set, definitely hold on to these, because this is going to be probably the most valuable rare in the entire set. Back to the Front is a normal trap card that is essentially Call of the Haunted or Oasis of Dragon Souls. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but the fact that it's not tied to the card itself, the resurrection effect, meaning that if the monster or the card leaves the field, that you're able to keep your monster on the board, that means your opponent can't chain to it with other cards like spell and trap removal, things like Trident, anything that typically Call of the Haunted would be very susceptible to. This card doesn't give a flying fuck, and that's absolutely amazing because this is basically Monster Reborn in a trap card. And I know here in the TCG we don't have Monster Reborn because it's banned, so this is honestly the next best thing. If you're playing any deck that uses Call of the Haunted or Oasis of Dragon Souls to any extent, could you imagine this back in hat format? this is the card you're absolutely going to want. Now, obviously, if you're playing something like Stellar Knights, Call of the Haunted is still arguably better because you have Stellar Knight Trevere to bounce the card back to your hand and recycle, so there are instances where Call of the Haunted is arguably better, but for most generic decks, if you're considering at all running something like Call of the Haunted because, let's say you have a monster that gets a massive graveyard effect or it just gets an amazing on-summon effect, then you're definitely going to want to go with Back to the Front. I'm not kidding when I'm telling you guys to hoard these, because this card is absolutely phenomenal, and I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being like a $2, if not maybe a $3 rare, because right now in the OCG, a lot of decks are running multiple copies of this card, and the fact that it's a rare is honestly still mind-blowing to me. Now, moving on to number 2, we have probably my favorite card in the entire set, and that card is Heavy Storm Duster. Now, Heavy Storm Duster is arguably the next variant of Twin Twister. So Heavy Storm Duster is a trap card that on activation you can target 2 spell or trap cards on the field and destroy them, but the turn you activate this card, you cannot conduct your battle phase. So again, immediate parallels with Twin Twister here, and the thing about it is, there's really arguments for whether you should play one over the other. Now, obviously, Twin Twister is a quick play spell, which means it's a lot more versatile in its application, and you can really get a lot more out of it, and you can kind of almost use Twin Twister like you would Heavy Storm Duster by setting it, and then using it, let's say, during your opponent's end phase like you would be with Heavy Storm Duster. But the big catch here that makes Heavy Storm Duster so appealing is the fact that you don't have to discard a card. Now, I know a lot of decks have the ability to mitigate the ability of the minus that you have to take, or not exactly the minus, but more so the 2 for 2 you have to take for the Twin Twister. But the fact that Heavy Storm Duster is inherently a +1, but the trade-off is that it's a trap card, so it's a little bit slower. That really comes down to personal preference and also format dependency on the relative speed of the format. If we get down to a much slower format and we're able to play cards like this, then arguably Heavy Storm Duster is much better. But if we're in a faster format and we really don't have that, ability to afford waiting that many turns, or games are going by a lot quicker, then Twin Twister is probably the better choice. Regardless of either case, this is a card you want to pick up a playset of. This card is only going to be a super rare, and that really shocks me because Konami's had a trend recently of taking generic spell and trap removal and making it a secret rare. Look at Cosmic Cyclone. Look at Unending Nightmare. These are cards that in Japan were much lower rarities and then got rarity bumped all the way up to secret rare when they got migrated over to the TCG. But now, this card is only a super rare. This might be the next Twin Twister that ends up being, like a $6 to $8 super rare because it's so generic, it's so powerful, and you don't care about the battle phase aspect because you're always going to be using this on your opponent's turn. And against any heavy back row deck, there's just so much application here that this has to be probably my favorite individual card of the entire set. But moving on to number 1. If Heavy Storm Duster was my favorite individual card, then what could possibly number 1 be? Well, for the number 1 slot, I couldn't really dedicate it to just one card. I had to dedicate it actually to a group of cards, and frankly, the number 1 slot goes to Link monsters in general, because now that Konami has released an entirely new mechanic into the game has been crying for Link monsters that we can actually start to play with. And I know we just had the Link Strike starter deck not too long ago, but we've only had 3 Link monsters to work with these past couple of weeks. Now we're going to have the opportunity to experiment with all of these other Link monsters that are going to be at our disposal coming out of Code of the Duelist. I'm specifically talking about the more generic ones as well, more so than the more archetype specific. I'm talking about cards like Mrs. Radiant. Mrs. Radiant is going to do so much into the meta as long as Zodiac is still around, because you know, it just so happens to be that Zodiac are Earth, and it pretty much allows them to do Trident Emerald combos, you know, with ease again, without having to worry about going into Deco Talker. Then you have stuff like Gaia Saber, the Lightning Shadow, who's a generic Link 3, is also a normal monster, which is very important to note because it can be resurrected with things like Digusto Emerald, and also has just some very good Link markers in general. And then you have stuff like Topological Bomber Dragon, which has an absolutely absurd effect. And if we're talking about absurd effects, you really can't beat Firewall Dragon. Now, I know Firewall Dragon for the time being is really just being used for some very degenerate FTKs by being able to lock your opponent out of both extra deck zones or being able to use some FTKs like with Cannon Soldier and some really just purely degenerate bullshit. But frankly, Firewall Dragon has one of the craziest abusable effects I've ever seen on a card, and while it might just be used for gimmicks for the time being, these are definitely cards, especially Firewall Dragon, that you're going to want to pick up and have some copies on hand, because when we get more support in the future, these cards are going to become vital, and you want to make sure that you have all these cards at your disposal because you don't want to be behind the hype and have to pay hype prices when you don't have to. But guys, that's just it for my top 5. Let me know down in the comments what your guys' top cards are coming out of Code of the Duelist. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. It's always exciting when a new set comes out because there's always so many cool new cards and people are just dying to experiment and really see what the new set is all about. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you really like this video, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.